Hi, and welcome. Today, I'd like to talk about the recent mandates issued by CMS and ONC and how they affect you as payers or providers. Let's get started. So, here are a few of the topics that we'll dive into today. The first being government initiatives relating to patient access to electronic health information. We'll talk a little bit about the final rules that were recently issued by ONC and CMS. We'll talk about the COVID-19 delays recently announced by CMS. We'll talk about what those final rules mean for payers as well as providers. And we'll talk about some options that you have for coming into compliance with these mandates. So, the first initiative that we'll deal with is the 21st Century Cures Act and the recent final rule issued by ONC related to interoperability and tackling the patient information blocking aspects of the 21st Century Cures Act. The second being the My Health eData initiative and CMS's recent final rule related to similar topics, interoperability and patient access to data. And both of these mandates are really geared towards moving the healthcare system towards greater interoperability by making healthcare data openly shareable. And the CMS mandate specifically calls out this goal. So let's look first at the ONC mandate. The ONC mandate specifically deals with giving patients electronic access to their electronic health information. It defines that APIs are going to be the mechanism through which patients access this information so that it can be accessed from smartphone apps. And it also defines the HL7 FHIR R4 standard as the industry standard for the APIs that will be used for this data interchange. Additionally, it defines the US CDI V1 data interoperability set as the standard subset of healthcare data that must be shareable, must be interoperable between payers and providers, and as we'll see, payers and other payers. It also implements the information blocking provisions of the 21st Century Cures Act, which really deal with the design of IT systems, and the blocking of this information is something that is now unacceptable to ONC and risks civil monetary penalties. And it goes on to define 8 exceptions under which information blocking is allowed, but these primarily deal with the system is down, or there's a security issue, or there is a privacy issue. Next, we'll talk about the CMS mandate. The CMS mandate has provisions for both payers and providers. We'll talk about providers in a second. From a payer perspective, this mandate applies virtually to all CMS regulated payers and deals with patient access to their electronic health information as well as provider information. And there are compliance deadlines in the CMS mandate. The first one recently having been delayed by CMS until July 1st, 2021, where payers are going to have 2 FHIR APIs running. The first one to allow patients to have access to their electronic health information, specifically the subset defined by the US CDI, as well as a provider directory FHIR API. And this is for use by patients, as well as it's actually designed to be open to any third-party application with public provider information so that anybody out on the internet can find out what providers a particular payer supports. Now, the primary consumers of this data are really going to be smartphone apps. If you have an iPhone and you've used the health app, for example, that gives you an example of what customers will be using to access this data. A couple of challenges to be aware of if you're a payer. The first being when you create these APIs, you need to make sure that you have sufficient security in place so that these systems can be exposed directly onto the internet. As soon as they're public and people know they're there, good people are going to start accessing their data. Bad people are going to start poking around on the APIs to see if they can exploit them and get access to data that's behind them. From a patient perspective, standards, compliance, and interoperability testing are critical. Remember that the consumers of this data are going to be smartphone apps. So payers in performing interoperability testing are going to have to work with external application developers. And this is something that's new for a lot of payers because a lot develop their own applications and have their own ecosystem. But the reality is going to be that CMS has designed this mandate specifically to foster the ecosystem of third-party applications that have access to this data. And so payers are going to have to become responsive to dealing with interoperability issues related to third-party app developers. The second deadline for payers in the CMS mandate is where things really get interesting. By January 1st, 2022, payers will need to implement the capability to do payer-to-payer data exchange. And what this essentially means is that when a patient switches payers, they have the ability to go to their current payer and initiate the process of their current payer transferring their electronic health information to their new payer. It's essentially the equivalent of porting a phone number from one mobile carrier to another. The unique thing about this is that it requires payers to initiate a FHIR transaction with another payer. So when you're implementing this particular capability, you need to be aware of that from an interoperability perspective. You're going to be testing against other implementations and likely other implementations that are going to be hosted by your competitors. And now let's take a look at what there is for providers in the CMS mandate. The big one here is that CMS is going to require that hospitals have the ability to send admission, discharge, and transfer notifications via the FHIR APIs to other providers. And this is designed to foster continuity of care so that a patient is discharged from the hospital, their PCP gets a notification via FHIR that they've been discharged. The PCP looks in on the customer to mitigate any post-hospital stay issues that might require rehospitalization. The CMS is also going to require that the FHIR endpoints of providers are listed in the NPPS system so that providers will have the ability to send and receive notifications to each other, and they'll be listed in a directory so that when a provider needs to figure out how they send notifications to another provider, the other provider can be looked up and their FHIR endpoint found and used. And if you look at it, these are pretty simple things from a capabilities perspective, but the net here is that CMS is effectively mandating that providers be FHIR enabled and be able to find each other and be able to talk to each other. And really what this is all about is fostering future interoperability for capabilities beyond these two specific requirements. You also notice that the applicability dates for these requirements is not very far away. With the recent delay published in the CMS final rule in the Federal Register, you've got an extra 6 months in which to be compliant, but those dates are still fast approaching. So now let's talk about some options regarding deploying this type of functionality to become compliant with these mandates. And regardless of whether you're a payer or a provider, you're pretty much going to fall into one of two buckets. You're going to be a business who builds and maintains your own systems, in which case your technical experts now have to become FHIR experts, read through the mandates, figure out which of the 140 plus FHIR APIs you need to implement, figure out which of the dozens of resources you need to be able to map into those APIs from your backend systems, integrate that all into your backend, build in API security to protect against bad actors, tie into a security infrastructure that so you can verify that patients who are coming in asking for their own data are allowed to access their own data and not the data for another person or persons, and to build an audit system such that these transactions are tracked end to end. So if, for example, someone were to lodge an information blocking complaint saying that they weren't able to access their information from your systems, you could produce the evidence from your audit systems showing exactly when they tried to access the system and specifically what data was returned and why. The other bucket is a business who effectively relies on one or more vendors for their systems. And a lot of, if not most, providers fall into this bucket, where providers typically run their businesses on big EHR, EMR systems from very large vendors, and you're going to be relying on those vendors to provide that capability for you so that you can become compliant within the mandate deadlines. And the things you need to do if you fall into that category is really dig into, listen to what they say, read what they've published regarding your vendor's stance on the mandates, FHIR itself, and open electronic health information access, and get details on specifically what your vendor is going to do for you with times and dates, so that you know that your vendor is going to support you from a compliance perspective. Determine if what your vendor needs to do for you is going to cause any disruption to your business. Is this something that's going to be a major systems upgrade? Is it just a minor add-on module or what? And determine what it's going to cost for you. And if you're one of the many providers that relies on more than one EHR or claims system vendor, repeat this process if you have more than one, and ensure that everybody is going to be on board with providing you the required functionality by the compliance dates. While you're going through that exercise, it's also important to think towards the future and look at what capabilities your vendors are going to provide for you from a greater FHIR data interoperability and sharing perspective in the future. Because if you read between the lines of what's going on here, this is really just the beginning. And by this, I mean these mandates are just the beginning of what's going to happen regarding data sharing via FHIR. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Regardless of which one of these buckets you fall into, it's always nice to have an option. You may have a scenario where you build your own systems, but your technical teams are not up to speed, and you don't know if you're going to be able to make the mandate dates by the deadlines, implement everything that you need to implement in order to what is effectively making access to your healthcare information systems directly onto the internet. That scares a lot of people, and it rightly should, because once those access points are there, you still have the HIPAA requirements, which require you to protect that data against people that shouldn't have it. And you've got an entry point on the internet that people can start poking around in your systems, and you want to make sure everything's locked down and secure. So let's talk about another option for mandate compliance. And one of those other options that you have is a solution from Prolifics called QuickFHIR. And what QuickFHIR is a FHIR data and integration solution that's extensible and is designed to add on to existing IT systems that hold your EHI and essentially bring them directly into the FHIR ecosystem. There are a lot of things that QuickFHIR does at its core. It allows you to deploy a simple deployment that adds onto your existing systems and gives you that ONC CMS mandate compliance. So basically, QuickFHIR sits between your EHI systems of record and the internet, provides externally FHIR APIs that you need to be compliant with the mandates, provides the APIs that are required, as well as the resource mappings for the resources that are accessible via those APIs. So you see here, the two components of a basic QuickFHIR implementation are the share and collect component and the integration component. The share and collect component basically provides everything that you need to provide externally. All the APIs, all the API security, all the metering, all the management that you need out of the box to provide those APIs directly out onto the internet. And then that links directly with the integration module, which is the portion that talks to your back-end systems. If, for example, your electronic health information systems of record provide HL7 access, Prolific's QuickFire can provide all the in-between capability to expose FHIR APIs out into the internet, translates those into HL7 calls, which go to your backend systems, and it can talk to systems via HL7 or EDI or FHIR, or even if you have custom-built systems, as long as there's some type of standards integration point, there's a database or an API that we can talk to. QuickFire can be deployed rapidly to give you that complete mandate compliance solution. Another important thing to note about QuickFire is that it can serve as the FHIR integration solution for multiple systems. So you don't have to have, for example, one FHIR deployment for each EHR system if you use more than one EHR vendor. And it's deployable on-premise, in the cloud, or as a managed service, and even in a hybrid model. So say, for example, if you want the share and collect functionality that does all of the API exposing out into the internet done in the cloud, but you want the integration portion of it that talks to your EHR systems done on-premise, it's very easy to split that up and deploy it that way, because Prolific's QuickFire is future-proof and built on open cloud-ready technology so that you can decide which components you want to run where. And if it's a matter of running it in the cloud, on which cloud provider. The solution isn't tied to any specific cloud provider from a cloud deployment perspective, but does use technology that allows it to be deployed on any cloud, whether it's AWS or Azure or IBM Cloud. It doesn't really matter. So before we talk a little bit more about QuickFire and why QuickFire might be the best solution for you, let's step back for a second and go back to the mandates, and let's see if we can do a little bit of reading between the lines that I was speaking about earlier to look at what these mandates really mean for the future. We would strongly advise that you don't look at the mandates as the end of the journey, or that's all that you're going to have to do in the future, because basically it's really just the beginning. If you look at what's happening with the mandates, and specifically if you go and read the text of the mandates, there is a lot of policy, if you will, written into the mandates themselves explaining what they're trying to accomplish. And specifically, the government is moving healthcare towards modern data interchange by using the pull that it has with Medicare and Medicaid. It wants to make the systems more efficient, it wants to give patients more transparency, and it wants to provide to patients more choices. And the way that that's going to happen is that data interchange has got to come out of the 90s and into the 21st century. HHS clearly sees that there's a patient desire for this. A lot of the future initiatives that are being worked on, such as pricing transparency, are really going to require open access to data. So they're laying the foundation of making providers have to talk to each other by the middle of 2021. That's pretty aggressive. Payers will have to start talking to patients, but the real big one is they're going to have to start talking to each other and exchanging data at patient request by the end of 2022. Let's look at what the method for them talking to each other is capable of. If you dig into FHIR, FHIR has been designed to replace everything that's being done now in terms of data transfer technologies, everything that's done locally with HL7, everything that's done remotely with EDI and X12. It's pretty much all there, and they've built an extension mechanism into FHIR R4 so that they'll be able to add support for things that they didn't think of, or things they missed, or situations that they hadn't realized yet. And if you add all that up, pretty much what you're looking at is that over time, FHIR will become the de facto mechanism for how healthcare data is interchanged. Here's a good example of how FHIR is going to shake up the healthcare data landscape. FHIR data brings a new level of mobility to healthcare information, and by its standards-based nature, FHIR data is really easy to move, store, and ingest into any type of healthcare engagement system, all the way from tablets up to mainframes, assuming, of course, that HIPAA and other privacy protections are maintained. This new type of data mobility really opens up a whole world of opportunities in the areas like data exploration, augmentation, and analysis, including integrating insights from this data into real-time business processes. Think here things like real-time analysis of script data to catch things like pill shopping and other types of fraud. So you see here not just the acceleration and cost reduction of existing healthcare processes through FHIR like claims processing and care coordination, but healthcare data is really now poised to make the leap to driving cost-effective data solutions for analysis and prediction that were previously out of reach to the core healthcare payer and provider industry. So back to what the mandates mean for the future of FHIR in your business. I spoke earlier about the mandates themselves being only the beginning, and they're the beginning based on HHS laying the foundation for FHIR interoperability between payers, between providers, from payers and providers to patients. The thing you want to ensure when you look at what your FHIR strategy is going to be is that if you're looking to deploy a solution to get you compliant with the mandates, you want to ensure that that solution is going to take you into the future as well, not just the specific APIs that you need to deploy by 2022 if you're a payer, but also how are you going to integrate FHIR data interchange into your entire business? How are you going to, if you're a payer, evolve your systems so that in addition to handling claims via EDI, you can also handle claims by FHIR. And as you start to see some of the cost savings of using standards-based interchange for claims versus more expensive EDI solutions, and you want to start to migrate more and more of your data over, you want to make sure that you have a foundation that's extensible for what those future needs are going to be. And that gets into some of the more advanced capabilities of QuickFhire. In the previous slide where you saw QuickFhire, you saw we have the share and collect and the integration layers. But additionally, QuickFhire has between those an enhancement layer, which really focuses on as the data moves into or out of my systems, how do I add value to it? For example, use the example of a payer where you're eventually accepting claims via FHIR, or this capability can even be provided to claim systems that are still using EDI as well. You want to be able to, as the claims data comes in, we all know how notoriously problematic healthcare data is with claims data that's miscoded, provider information that's wrong, basically data that has quality problems. Built into QuickFhire, we have the ability to deploy an enhancement layer which provides things like data governance, data cleansing, the ability to augment data with data from external systems. So for example, if you have a provider data systems of record that you can use as part of the data cleansing process or to augment the claim itself with more provider data than was submitted with the claim, you have the ability to do that. You also have the ability to deploy advanced AI and machine learning pipelines so that looking at claims that need to be corrected, and there are potentially multiple corrections that you could take based on what the claims data looks like, you can actually implement machine learning that would learn from past claims and how claims were formed and give you a recommendation on the most likely cleansing or data correction to take in this claim before it was submitted. And the goal there, of course, in that particular use case is to increase the amount of claims that sail through your adjudication systems, or conversely, reduce the number of exceptions that have to be handled by a human. When there is an exception now, you have the ability to have essentially machines correct the data as opposed to having to have humans do it. We also have some capabilities that integrate healthcare blockchains into QuickFhire. We're actually right now working with a major payer provider in the US to implement a healthcare blockchain that's going to track encounters from the moment someone walks in the door to the time that the payment is settled. So let's take a look at the Prolific's customer journey as it applies to QuickFhire for ONC CMS mandate deployments. The Prolifics customer journey is a 4-phase process that begins with a 1/2 to 1 day quick-fire discovery workshop. In the quick-fire discovery workshop, our FHIR integration and data experts will sit down with your team at no cost to you. We'll discuss your mandate requirements, your desired business outcomes, as well as going over your existing IT landscape. We'll map those to a plan that shows what moving forward with a quick-fire deployment would look like. From there, we move into the paid engagements, which begin with a 1-week quick-fire architecture and advisory workshop. Here, our architects will sit down with your IT infrastructure personnel and perform an in-depth assessment of your existing IT landscape. We'll map out your existing systems, their integration points, data sources, and security integration points, and how they map to a quick-fire deployment. The outcome from this workshop would be a solution definition document detailing one or more paths forward to building a quick-fire MVP or a quick-fire quick start pilot. If you decide to move forward, this leads to the 3rd phase, which is the MVP or the quick start pilot phase itself. This is an 8 to 12 week engagement where Prolifics would deploy quick-fire infrastructure. We'd build out a pilot that implements your mandate compliance use cases. And at the end of this pilot, you'd be able to see and touch an actual demonstration of that pilot implementing your mandate compliance use cases and working with your systems. Another option, which is key for some scenarios or customer types where a quick start pilot wouldn't be allowed to touch your existing production or test systems, is the Prolifics Innovation Center. The Innovation Center is a place that allows us to stand up pilots or MVPs for solutions on our infrastructure using snapshots of your data. This would allow us to collaboratively iterate through the solution pilot and its deployment without worrying about the logistics of having to have it access your actual production and test systems. The MVP quick start phase concludes with the delivery of a plan and budgetary estimate for moving the MVP or pilot into a production environment, should you choose to do so. If you decide to move forward with moving the MVP or pilot into production, the 4th phase involves the actual work of productizing, of scaling, and of operationalizing the solution before that production solution is turned over to your personnel. Prolifics also has the ability to run the production environment as a managed service, either on premises or in the cloud vendor of your choice, should that be something that your people would be interested in looking at. Before we finish up, a few words on who we are and why Prolifics for your FHIR integration and data needs. Prolifics has over 25 years of experience in the healthcare industry, and our consultants support 3 of the 5 largest healthcare companies in the U.S. And as I mentioned previously, we are currently in the process of moving a healthcare blockchain into production for one of the largest payer providers in the U.S. Prolifics is both an IBM Platinum as well as a Red Hat Apex business partner, allowing us to base many of our solutions on some of the most innovative and forward-looking technology in the industry. Prolifics can deliver a global delivery model for those looking to maximize cost savings, as well as a US-based delivery model for those clients whose businesses require it. Finally, we have a broad range of technology expertise, not just expertise in one particular area. We have expert practices in advanced technology areas such as cloud-native development, advanced data science and analytics, and intelligent process automation, as well as one of the largest integration practices of any business partner in North America. This brings us to the end of our discussion on the CMS ONC final rules for interoperability and patient access. We hope that we've given you some useful information regarding options available for your compliance needs. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at solutions@prolifics.com. Thank you and see you next time.